A lot of responses said, mind your own business, and a few even said, ask for a referral.
He had certain circumstances which forced him to get into multiple contracts with different people.
Dual employment is fine in two circumstances.
You cannot justify something which is illegal.
During this period of time that you're working with me, you'll exclusively work with me.
You have to understand you're not the only one in this situation. If you cannot afford the premium, you most certainly cannot afford the treatment.
Hospitalization, right? The Soham Parekh story went viral for various reasons. But most importantly, it was the concept of moonlighting. Is it legal? And if it is legal, is it ethical? If you're a freelancer, there are a few important questions to ask. What is the right way to draw up a contract? One that is not unfair towards you, the professional, and the company. And if you are a professional, chances are that you're not receiving a regular income. How do you manage your financial goals and responsibilities? What are the right things to do financially in order of priority? This is Moneywise on NDTV Profit, and I'm Mathew. Joining me on this conversation is Ankita Ray, partner at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, and Harshvardhan Roongta, CFP Roongta Securities. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining in. I want to set the context for this conversation with the results of a poll that we did on social media, and I think that the results are quite interesting. We asked, do you think that moonlighting should be allowed? And very interestingly, the two responses that got the most votes are yes, always, and second, depends on the contract. The second question we asked was, have you ever had a secret hustle? 20% said yes, thriving quietly. And the most responses, however, were thought about it. The third question we asked, if your team member had a side hustle, you would, 1, support them, warn HR, mind your own business, and 3, ask for a referral. A lot of responses said, mind your own business, and a few even said, ask for a referral. So we got a few very interesting responses. It kind of gives you a sense of what people are thinking. But the most important question at the start of this conversation, and that's to you from a legal standpoint, is moonlighting legal?
So if you see, Indian law does not really define moonlighting, right? It's basically understood that in addition to your primary employment, if you have another job, or in the case of Soham Parekh, multiple jobs, right? Now the legal standpoint therefore has evolved by way of various case laws going up to the Supreme Court. And the position is pretty clear that moonlighting, or shall I say dual employment, because when you say moonlighting, there's always a connotation that it's without the knowledge of the employer. So the more legally acceptable term is dual employment. And dual employment is fine in two circumstances. 1, as long as your employment contract provides for it, and 2, if you have sought the prior approval of your employer. Right? Barring these two conditions, it is not supposed to be legal. Now, of course, we have to remember here that we are talking about an employer-employee relationship, right? Now, why is that important? We need to draw a distinction between the term employee and that of a consultant.
Or professional.
Or a professional, or an independent contractor, freelancer, right? Now, when you talk about, say, an employee, you're on the rolls of a company. The company pays you a salary, makes your social security contributions. As opposed to that, if you're a freelancer or if you're a consultant, you are hired on a service contract, which means you're hired to do a particular service and you're given a fee in exchange of that. Right? Now, how that usually plays out is the contracts are quite different for both these categories of professionals. When we talk about, of course, moonlighting, you will see you're talking about an employment contract and someone having multiple employments, right? So that's the way we kind of approach it.
Okay, so we'll circle back to a couple of these things, and I've gotten my initial answer: is it legal or is it not? The answer I have gotten is that it depends. It depends
Absolutely.
on whether you're an employee and whether your employer knows.
Yeah,
one
but
and two, if
just
it's a
to-
contract. If it's a contract, if it's available as an option in your contract, then you can do that.
Yes, but even if you're not an employee, it depends on your contract.
Sure. So
right?
we'll circle back to that
Sure.
type of contract. The question to you is, one of the things that Soham Parekh has said is that he was living hand to mouth. He had the need to go out and sign all of these multiple contracts. Now, I don't want to debate that. The point is that it draws to light the reason why a lot of people do this, which is that they have an urgent need for capital. They have an urgent need to generate more income. And that stems from the fact a lot of the times from not receiving money on an ongoing basis, Harsh. Is this the biggest challenge that a professional that is in this kind of scenario faces? The inability to have a regular income?
So, well, Alex, there are two parts to this. The one is irrespective of what reasons you give. So, as in this case, where he said that he was hand to mouth, etc., he had certain circumstances which forced him to get into multiple contracts with different people. You cannot justify something which is illegal.
Yeah.
So there could be a situation, you cannot say that, look, I was in a financial problem, that is why I did this.
Yeah.
That does not exempt a person from,
Sure.
doing something illegal.
Sure.
So that's the first part of it. Now come to what your second question was. Does, being hand to mouth or not having sufficient cash flows instigate a person or motivate him to do something else? Well, if there is a survival, kind of a threat, then maybe that a person may look for any source that he can generate extra income. Now, still that does not justify, if I may say so. I mean, it's not fair if it's in your contract, as Ankita mentioned, if it's in your contract to be an exclusive engagement, if it's in your employee agreement for that matter, so then you cannot justify it by any means.
Sure.
Now, what do you do in such a case? So one, you have to understand you're not the only one in this situation who's trying to manage cash flows. So do not let these circumstances, hit onto your morale, where you're going to say that, or your moral for that matter, and to say that, okay, let me now do something which is illegal. Now, you have to very consciously, okay, it's easier said than done, but you have to very consciously, try and arrange your cash flows. You may approach your employer or that person whom you're working with for, say, advance payment for your services.
Sure.
Right? Rather than do something which is illegal and that backfires upon you so badly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the way to deal with a situation where you are hand to mouth. But beyond that, generally, and this is a general statement or a general question, would you agree that a lot of professionals face the problem of not having money when they need it? And so famine and fortune or famine and surplus is something that they're constantly dealing with, because there will be protracted periods of time when they're not earning, but then they get a bulk of their money. So cash flow is the biggest issue. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yes. So in fact, things have become better now. So in my own experience, we are dealing with our own clients. We have many freelancers and professionals who are now engaging with us. We constantly face this problem of sorting out their cash flows because they get money sometimes when they contract and when they execute a particular project, they get their funds immediately in their hand. And all the next payment cycle is almost a year or 6 months later. So for those 6 months, they're not going to have a salary kind of an inflow. So they have to manage their cash flows in that period with the lump sum that they already received. Now talk about merchant navy. Talk about all sailors who are in merchant navy. So they are by their employment contracts not working for 12 months.
Sure.
They work for like about 6, 7 months or 8 months, and they are on land, onshore for the rest of the period, where they're not even engaged, where they're not even getting their salaries. So when you get money in that period of 6 to 8 months, now that money has to be surviving for 12 months at least. So these are very common circumstances. It's not something unusual for freelancers.
In your opinion then, from that perspective, before we dive deep into the way that contracts should be constructed, what in the order of priority, what are the steps that somebody in this situation needs to take? It's possible that a lot of people listening in are either starting down this path or contemplating it. So what are the things that you should strike off your list in order of priority?
So first and foremost, you have to be very clear and accept and acknowledge the fact that you will not have a steady cash flow. Many people whom we interact with, they're so positive in life, which you should be, but they're so positive in life saying that, okay, now I've got X amount of money in this quarter, say for example, let's go buy a fancy car. Next quarter, we'll look at it that time. We'll manage something. So this kind of a pushing your problems for the next quarter or the next year is not going to solve problems. So you need to be very conscious and aware that this is a payment that you received in this quarter and you may not have any cash flows for the next 2 to 3 quarters.
Yeah.
So you need to have enough provisions made for surviving during those periods where you don't have cash flows. So your basic expenses, so you first make an estimate of what are your basic expenses for your food, clothing, shelter. I mean, these things which you need to just pay off for sure. And that much amount you need to make sure that you've kept it aside. Now, anything over and above that you have, that you may think of spending on discretionary items.
Sure.
Like you may want to upgrade a phone, whatever you want to do.
Or buy a car.
Or buy a car for that matter. So buying a car is again tricky because there's an EMI.
So I will circle back on insurance, for example, and sometimes, in fact, if you have enough of an amount that you're receiving, the ability to pay yourself a salary, you can actually work that out. I'll circle back to that. But Ankita, I want to dive into the nature of these contracts. And here, I'm specifically not talking about employee-employer relationship. I'm talking about consultants. So I'm talking about professionals that, as you pointed out, are on service contracts.
Right.
And there are various ways in which these are drawn up. I've heard of some novel ways in which these can be drawn up. When you're looking at such a contract, what are the things that are normally contained? And if you do want to stipulate that you want the freedom to take up additional sources of income, what should you look at as a professional in these contracts?
Right. So I understand we are approaching it more from the perspective of consultants.
Yes.
But I think the clause that we are looking at will remain the same whether it's an employee-employer contract or a consultancy, which is called the exclusivity contract. As the name suggests, it basically means that during this period of time that you're working with me, you'll exclusively work with me, right? So the first thing that anybody who wants to do another job in addition to the one that is primary for them should look out for that exclusivity clause and what it says, right? Now, there are various ways in which it can be handled. Some clauses will say that, okay, during your working hours, you cannot work for anybody else, right? Some employers who want to be more sanguine about how this clause will play out, they will say that during the tenure of this agreement, right? So it's not working hours. It's as long as you're working for me, whatever the hours, you cannot work for anybody else.
Sure.
Now, these are very watertight clauses seen in employer-employee contracts. These are also now finding a mention in the consultancy agreements also. But this is where it helps when you speak to the service provider and have a dialogue with them. In cases, both parties can even negotiate to see the contours that they want to plan out. For example, it can be that, okay, you cannot work for certain of my competitors.
Sure.
Okay, but you can work for everybody else.
Right.
As we are increasingly seeing in some sectors, depending on the kind of talent or the lack thereof, if you want to hold on to people, some companies may actually be okay with you doing other jobs as long as you inform them, or in some cases, take their prior approval. So these are the basic aspects that need to be looked at. I mean, recently we are also working with many employers, for that matter, in drawing up dual employment policy, because they also realize that, okay, we are fine with them having another source of income as long as our interests are not hampered in any manner.
So would you say, Ankita, from a legal standpoint, that it's becoming much easier for individuals to find work outside of the traditional sources, to say, for example, in the IT space, if you're coding for somebody, or in the content space, if you're writing for somebody, if you're ghostwriting for somebody, or if you're doing a voiceover, nobody's going to be able to point out and say, hey, or maybe voiceover if you're known well enough.
Yeah.
But if you've written for somebody, nobody's going to be able to say, hey, you know what, I know you're writing, I know you wrote. So I guess employers from that perspective are becoming wiser to the fact that they need to get ahead of this problem, because people might just do this anyway. You saw the results of the poll, so you want to be a little more accommodative. Is that the perspective?
Yes and no. Depends on the sector largely, and again depends on whether that sector hires more of employees or more of independent contractors or consultants, right? Employers typically tend to be a bit more protective of their employees, and for obvious reasons, right? You are completely within the system of the company, you have access to their confidential information, etc. But you are right, they are thinking about it. We are seeing many employers actually thinking this idea that, you know, as long as they tell me or take my approval and they are not with a competitor, I'm fine with them having a side hustle. That's fine.
And it can be social media as well, right? Because a lot of people are both social media influencers and professionals.
Correct. And, you know, in that kind of a situation, what also matters is the kind of information you're putting out there as a social media influencer.
Right.
Because nothing that you say should damage the reputation of my company, right? So that is also a valid reason that employers often have.
And people codify that?
Oh yes, they do.
So can give me an example? I mean, not with a company name, but how this would be drawn up?
That to say that if you're releasing any content, you know, they have guidelines on the kind of content that you should not put out.
Sure.
For example, you know, with the geopolitical times that we are living in, many employers are actually coming out with policies to say that please be careful about what you say about the geopolitical situation. Ideally, do not even go out there and make a statement
about it,
because you are our employee and that reflects
on the company,
on us. Right? So these are slight shifts that we are seeing. Now, of course, if we come to the space where a consultancy or a freelancer is the norm, then we see things to be slightly more relaxed.
A little looser,
But at the same time, companies are very careful about whether you're working with a competitor or not.
Sure.
And I'm sure there are valid interests, right, on both sides. Of the coin.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and very interesting conversation on the legal aspects of it. But Harsh, to circle back to that insurance, and you've said on conversations with me, even for the regular salary earning individual, you would put insurance in certain cases above even making an investment. It's the first thing that you suggest doing. And for somebody that's not earning a regular income, therefore it becomes much more important. So how do you go about this? Should all professionals have, for example, a term insurance if they have a dependent? Should they always have health insurance? How much cover do they have?
Yeah, so actually speaking, I mean, not only for people who have regular income, who have irregular income, every family should have adequate insurance in some form or the other. It could be life insurance. Health insurance is, of course, a must. But as you said, term insurance, is that mandatory? Well, it is mandatory for people who are earning members of the family and who have financial dependence on them. So if there is somebody in your family who's dependent financially upon you, it is your responsibility to ensure that if anything were to happen to you, there is an emotional loss to the family that cannot be replaced. But if there is a financial loss, there is a provision, there is a product that helps you replace yourself financially for your family. So it's a question you need to ask yourself. You love your family until you are alive, or you love your family until they are alive. Okay, so you may not be around, but your family still needs those requirements, financial requirements, which needs to be solved. So many of the times we believe that those people who in employment have a belief that because we are insured by our employers, we don't need to buy independent covers for ourselves.
Health insurance, right?
Yeah, so that's not true. So you just need to make sure that you are independently covered for yourself. It could be your term insurance, which is life cover. Now, health insurance is a very, very important cover to buy, especially in case you have irregular income. So I'm saying it is a necessity for everybody, but
even more
so for people who have irregular income. Now, let me highlight this with an example. Now, if you are a person who's on contract and you make your money only in certain periods of the year, and if there was any kind of a health issue where you or any of your family members were to be hospitalized, and all that savings that you had or all that income that you generated goes into paying for that health treatment, then what happens, right? So everything that you've done till now can completely be exhausted only with one hospitalization.
Sure.
Now, health insurance in that context becomes the most important cover to buy, and adequate health insurance, not just health insurance.
Okay.
Okay, so just make sure that, and I know many of some people come back to me and say, look, medical premiums have gone up exponentially.
Sure, yeah.
I cannot afford it. Should I not pay for it and not take a cover? The only statement that I would make in all such cases is, if you cannot afford the premium, you most certainly cannot afford the treatment.
Hospitalization, right?
Yeah, so non-affordability of premium is the smallest problem that you have.
Yeah.
Imagine if there was a hospitalization, you would most certainly not be able to afford the treatment cost.
So, and the second part of what I wanted to ask you was, can you pay yourself a salary? And there are ways in which you put a lump sum in a particular product. And in the mutual fund space, for example, you can do a systematic withdrawal plan if you set something up like that. Is that a feasible approach to have?
Of course. So what we're talking about is ensuring a regular cash flow, because our expenses are going to come month on month, right? So if I have money in my bank account, and this is usually what we do, so I can narrate that and illustrate that as well.
Sure.
So if there is a freelancer who earns in, say, particular in the first quarter, say for example, and we know in visibility that next 2 quarters there is no regular income because they're working on certain projects, and once the completion of the project happens, then they will be paid. So if you earned in the first quarter, for example, you park that money out, get it out of your bank account. Because if it lies in your bank account, then it's usually seen as a habit that you tend to spend it. But if you're taking one step, you create one leg of this transaction, which is you park that money in somewhere else. It could be mutual funds, it could be anywhere else. In some cases, we have another bank account in which it is transferred. So let's not get into the details of where it is transferred, but let's just put one wall in between you and you're spending that money.
Sure.
Now, you know that whatever expenses that you're incurring in this month, you have money in your bank account. Now, something that is going to happen next month, might as well come into your bank account in the next month. So that is where the SWP works, that you set up a systematic withdrawal plan and you say that I want the next tranche of redemption to be done only on the first of the next month. So it works like a salary for you.
Yes.
Though you're paying yourself, in the words that you used, you're paying yourself, just ensuring I get the money when I need it rather than keep it in my bank account and restrict myself from accessing it.
I do want to ask about escalation of cost. Of course, from the perspective of the employer, but from the perspective of the professional, you're talking about being remunerated for the work that you're doing. In your opinion, are these getting more common, or should there be conversations once again between the company or the employer and the individual to work that into a contract, to say that you have regular escalations for the amount that you're being remunerated for example, being paid for the work that you do? I met an interesting individual who has a credit-based system, for example. He has his defined amount of work, and beyond that, anything that is done is, say I give you 10 credits for the year, each activity is 1 credit, and beyond those 10 credits, you pay me as per the credit basis. So you can have novel contracts as well.
Oh, absolutely. But, this is not common, or I would say even required that much in a employer-employee situation, right? Because you're getting a regular salary, you have your scope of work, there are year-on-year increments, your bonuses. This all forms part of your company policies, which is a part of your contract, right? But yes, it is relevant when we are looking at freelance contracts or consultancy contracts. Like we discussed right up, that these are very project-based or service-based contracts, right? So to have a clear idea of which project it is, what are you required to do under it, and how much will you get paid for it, and what happens thereafter, or if there's any additional scope of work. Yes, we are seeing contracts being drawn out in a more expanded fashion, taking into account these contingencies as well.
Okay, and we're rounding out the conversation now. Oftentimes, and I've spoken to a few professionals, this is not really a widespread feedback that I've gotten, but anecdotal evidence, they don't really stop working, right? They continue working for as long as they can. They don't have a stop at 60, especially if they're doing a service. But how do you plan for when you stop working? That regular SIP becomes a problem. Is there a workaround?
So, well, Alex, the point is ideally every human should work until they are physically able to work. Because there's no point sitting at home at any point in time. I mean, it doesn't work well for your mind. It doesn't work well for yourself in any case. So how do you keep yourself engaged, whether professionally, whether productively, or whether social work? Okay, so you need to keep yourself occupied. The question is, how do you manage your cash flows? That is the very specific area that we're talking about. You need to be sure that post-retirement or post-working life, nobody's going to pay you anything.
Sure.
So you need to have adequate provisions and reserves made so that you can survive with dignity for the rest of your life. You don't want to go, asking for financial support from your children or from your relatives because you've been supporting them all your life. Imagine a situation post-retirement, you have to be dependent on your children for funding yourself. I mean, if given a situation, let's not walk into that, right? So plan well in advance so that you have enough reserves where you can live your life with dignity until you're alive.
Fantastic.
Okay. Now, just one point on, if you'd be interested to know, what is that line that you draw in terms of ethics with work, right?
Yeah.
So I have a very interesting example that I just recalled, if you permit me, and if the time permits. Okay, so I hired a cab once for the entire day. Okay, and the driver who was driving me around, the cab did not belong. He did not own that cab. He was only driving for the day. Now, every stop that I took, and when I came back, I saw him cleaning the car every time. The taxi, he was cleaning that every time. So out of curiosity, I just asked him, you're only driving it for the day. In the evening, you're supposed to return it back to the owner. Then every time that you're dropping me somewhere, I come back, you're cleaning the car. It's like an OCD kind of a problem or something else? He made a very interesting statement to me. He said, this is the car because of which I earn a living. Though it does not belong to me, I don't own it. But I'm just out of respect making sure that the source of my income needs to be respected and taken care of. So now coming to whether moonlighting can be legally organized in contracts, otherwise, I think anybody working for anybody in fiduciary responsibility to anybody just needs to ensure if this is the source of income for me, how morally right can I be to that organization or that person or that client so that I don't violate my own moral ethics, not to do with what is there on contract. You can have everything written and still do things. You can have nothing written and still do it correctly.
On that beautiful note, thank you so much to the both of you for taking the time. It's been an insightful conversation. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Moneywise. It's been an absolute pleasure bringing it to you. Let us know what you think about moonlighting and otherwise, and do stay tuned. Lots more coming up on NDTV Profit.